They say his real name was Elias Uglan. Born different, mind not quite right, body bent in ways that made strangers look twice. He never hurt anyone, but the children of Fairview didn't care. They called him Ugaloo, after the guttural sounds he made when he tried to speak. Every Halloween they played tricks on him. Rock throwing, cruel songs, crueler dares. But the last Halloween was the worst. They lured him into the town funeral home, Barrett Family Services back then, told him he could finally be part of their game. They shut him in a coffin, slammed the lid, and ran, giggling into the night. By morning, Elias was dead, suffocated in the dark, clawing at the lid until his nails snapped. No one was punished. The children swore it had been just a joke. The papers printed, "Tragic accident." The town tried to forget, but the children kept whispering that if you were bad, Mr. Ugaloo would come, that you'd hear him first, mumbling, wheezing, the way he used to when he tried to say his name. If you stayed too long in the funeral home basement, you might feel breath on your neck. If you stared into an open casket after midnight, sometimes another set of eyes stared back. Parents dismissed it as childish nonsense, yet every few years a child disappeared, last seen near the funeral home or dawdling by the cemetery gates. The unlucky ones were found later, folded unnaturally inside empty coffins, their faces twisted in terror. Maggie was 12 the night she was dared by her friends. Her grandfather had just died, and his service was being held in the Barrett Chapel. After everyone left, she snuck back in through the side door, flashlight in hand. "Say his name 3 times," her friends had whispered, "and he'll come for you." The chapel smelled of lilies and embalming fluid. Her grandfather's casket sat at the front, lid closed now. Maggie's breath clouded in the air. "Mr. Ugaloo," she said softly. The word felt ugly in her mouth. "Mr. Ugaloo." The chapel lights flickered. She laughed nervously. "Mr. Uga." The coffin creaked. She froze. The lid rose half an inch, slow and deliberate, as if something inside were pushing upward. Her flashlight beam trembled across the polished wood. She could hear it now, a wet, broken mumble, like someone trying to form words with a mouth that no longer remembered how. The lid slid the rest of the way open. Her grandfather's body lay still. But crouched inside, pressed against him, was a tall, crooked figure draped in funeral shrouds, its head turned toward her, fabric pulling tight across the warped bones beneath. A gaping mouth twitched behind the veil, jaw jerking open and closed, as if testing the sound of her name. Ma-ga. The flashlight slipped from her hand. The chapel doors slammed shut. The next morning, the director found the casket sealed. Inside was Maggie, curled and broken, eyes wide, mouth frozen mid-scream. Her grandfather's body was gone. The obituary printed the usual, tragic accident. The town tried to forget, but the children still whisper. If you linger near the funeral home after midnight, you can hear him, dragging his long fingers along the casket lids, mumbling, testing new names, waiting for his next victims. Every October, the town of Briar's Hollow seemed to orbit one place, Hallow's End Pumpkin Farm. Kids on school buses pressed their faces to the windows when they passed it. Families bundled into cars, cider in thermoses, to walk the rows and pick their jack-o'-lanterns. Teenagers snuck in after dark to smoke, kiss, and dare each other to creep as far back into the fields as the moonlight would allow. The patch itself stretched forever, rows upon rows of thick orange gourds fattening on black, loamy soil. No one knew how old the farm was, older than the town itself, some said. But Old Man Reeve, who ran the place, claimed the land had always been good for pumpkins and not much else. He never smiled when he said it. That October, the pumpkins were different. It started with small things, a curve too much like a cheek, a deep crease like a furrowed brow. Kids laughed, saying the pumpkins looked like they were pulling silly faces. Parents took photos and said it was just natural deformities, the way potatoes sometimes grew knobby or carrots forked in strange shapes. But the resemblance grew sharper as the month wore on. The grooves became hollows. The hollows became sockets, and the sockets began to look like eyes. Not cartoon eyes, not cute, the kinds of eyes that seemed to follow you as you walked the rows. One pumpkin looked eerily like the mailman Tom Burkett, right down to the gap between his front teeth. Another had the puckered lips and sharp chin of little Elsie Danton, who'd been missing since July. That was when the laughter died down. Sheriff Dunn made the papers after finding Kenny Phillips in the patch late one night. A pack of teens had dared him to spend the night out there, but Kenny never came home. They found him sprawled in the dirt, face mangled, mouth split far too wide, tongue bitten nearly in half. Beside him sat a squat pumpkin with his likeness pressed into its rind, so perfect it made the deputies sick. The sheriff tried to cordon the place off. Old Man Reeve stood at the gates with a shotgun, swearing no one would step into his land again. But people came anyway. The pumpkins drew them, at first out of curiosity, then out of something heavier, like gravity. The faces grew clearer, too clear. Mothers screamed when they spotted their sons. Wives fainted when they saw their husbands. Every missing person for miles around, decades back even, had a face in that patch. The long dead, the long forgotten, the names scratched off headstones by wind and rain. Their features bloomed in orange and green and black. Still, people came. Still, they stared. On October 30th, the town held its annual harvest festival. Lanterns hung on poles, kids bobbed for apples, fiddles played in the square, but no one lingered long in town. One by one, like moths, they drifted to the edge of Hallow's End, lantern light bobbing as they moved toward the endless rows. Old Man Reeve was nowhere to be seen. The gates hung open. The crowd stood in silence before the field. Hundreds of pumpkins stared back at them, their faces locked in silent screams or sneers or expressions too human for anyone to bear. Then, at the stroke of midnight, the first pumpkin split. It didn't rot, it didn't collapse, it burst. Strings of pulp spilled onto the soil, seeds popping like teeth. A pale hand pushed out, slick with stringy orange wetness, fingers curling as though clawing for the sky. A woman screamed. Dozens of pumpkins followed, splitting open like eggshells, each disgorging something pale, something human, something slick with juice. They crawled out, gasping, coughing, retching seeds from their throats. And as they rose, faces were revealed, faces that matched the pumpkins that had borne them. Some were neighbors gone missing. Some were children buried years ago. Some were strangers, faces no one knew until they remembered. Oh God, that's the man who drowned in '74. That's the teacher who vanished on her drive home. And then the reanimated turned their eyes toward the crowd. What followed wasn't a scream, but a chorus of screams, a tidal wave of panic as people fled the fields. Some made it, many didn't. The patch writhed with the crawling dead, slick with pulp and hunger. By dawn, the field lay still again. The rows stood quiet, fat and orange in the gray light. The pumpkins looked ordinary, innocent even, except each one bore a face. Fresh faces, faces of those who had gone missing in the night, faces of neighbors, family, friends. And in the very back row, hidden among the shadows, one pumpkin swelled heavy and wide, its rind stretching as the features of a new face pressed through. Every fall, just after the corn turned gold, the farmers of Wren's Hollow raised their scarecrows. Some used burlap sacks for heads, some painted crude faces on feed bags, and some, like old Eli Mercer, swore by carving a pumpkin and sticking it on the post. They stuffed the bodies with hay, buttoned old coats onto splintered frames, and tied them to poles to watch over the rows until harvest was done. And every year, after the last crop was pulled and the last wagon rolled in, folks gathered at the churchyard to burn their scarecrows in a great bonfire. It was tradition, older than the town itself. The flames licked high, sparks whirled into the night sky, and the children danced around the fire while the grown-ups drank cider and prayed. This year, Eli didn't come. When neighbors asked him why, he muttered that his scarecrow was too useful to burn. He said it with a crooked grin, one that left the other farmers uneasy. His fields, they noticed, never lost a single stalk to crows. His scarecrow worked better than anyone's, and if you got close enough, you'd swear you could hear it breathe. By late October, kids whispered about the Harvest Man. They said Eli's scarecrow wasn't stuffed with hay at all. They said it was a drifter, a thief maybe, that Eli had caught trespassing one night, bound him up, gutted him, and left him nailed to the pole. Some swore they'd seen the thing's head turn when no one was looking. Others claimed they heard creaking footsteps in the corn long after dark, when the wind was still. Sheriff Cotter checked in once. He found Eli's scarecrow looming at the edge of the rows, too tall, too broad-shouldered, with arms a little too long for the frame that held it. The pumpkin head was crudely carved, a jagged mouth split wide in a grin, and though Cotter would never admit it, he felt the carved eyes following him back to the road. That night, the dogs in town wouldn't stop howling. On Halloween, 3 teenagers, Marlene, Billy, and Frank, dared each other to sneak into Eli's field. They crept past the fence, flashlights jittering over the husks, and found the scarecrow waiting. It towered over them, coat flapping in the chill wind, pumpkin face leering. "Bet you won't touch it," Billy whispered. Frank laughed and shoved Marlene forward. She stumbled, nearly fell, but caught herself on the scarecrow's sleeve. The fabric felt damp, not from rain, from something thicker. The scarecrow shuddered. The kids screamed and ran, but Billy didn't make it to the fence. He turned back once, just once, and saw the scarecrow climb down from its post. The pole groaned, straw scattered, and the harvest man stretched its long arms with a creak of bone and wood. His grin split wider. His steps were heavy in the dirt. Billy's flashlight hit the ground still shining. By dawn, Eli Mercer's house was empty. His fields stood stripped bare, as though the corn had walked away in the night. Sheriff Cotter found only a single trail of huge, mud-caked footprints leading out past the fence line. They ended at the churchyard, where the bonfire pit still sat cold and black. And there, planted upright in the ashes, stood the scarecrow pole. The pumpkin head was gone. The coat hung limp. But in the dirt below, carved deep with a sharpened stick, were words that hadn't been there before. "Burn them, or I'll walk." That Halloween night, The people of Wren's Hollow built the biggest fire the town had ever seen. They burned every scarecrow, every husk, every scrap of straw until the smoke blotted out the stars. But out in the dark fields beyond the firelight, something still watched. And if you listened closely, past the crackle of flame, past the laughter of children trying too hard not to be afraid, you could hear it moving. The soft creak of footsteps, the rustle of corn that wasn't there. The harvest man stretching his long arms waiting for the year someone forgot the fire.